Hey, welcome back to Morning Call. I'm Alyce.
And I'm Crystal.
And today we're going to be talking, on this episode, we're going to be talking about the aftermath and the residual shock that came up for both of us and that maybe others have experienced. Crystal, do you want to share your experience about what happened and maybe continues to happen?
Yeah, I think the first immediate shock for me was just like the intensity of emotions. I mean, I think obviously, like, logically, and I'd be curious how you feel about this, but logically, like, it's a loss and you're going to be sad and you're going to feel heavy emotions. But it was like even more intense than I could have ever imagined. I know this sounds crazy, but I was like, am I going to die too? Like, physically, it felt so intense that I was like, oh my God, like, I just was not prepared for, like, I couldn't sleep. I mean, ruminating thoughts. So I think just the intensity of emotions was the first thing. And then, yes, I have thoughts about things that are, years later still shocking. But what are your thoughts on that first?
Yeah. I remember being like, all I wanted to do, I think, the first couple of weeks was pure adrenaline, right? Like, I was in a state of shock of like what was happening around me. Um, I did a lot of drinking, um,
Yeah.
and in a state of like I guess numbing, like a desire to numb. Um, and I was just like, and eventually it's like kind of that phased out, and like I remember there was a distinct moment where I was like, okay, I got to stop. I got to stop.
Yeah. I remember the day of my dad's service. It was a week after his passing. We all, and I'm not saying this with any judgment, but we, like, my family and like family friends, my sister's friends, all came back to the house, and it was like the amount of like alcohol consumed by like everybody, you could like feel the stress. Like, people were just trying to cope. So it was like just hanging out, but it turned into like, yeah, like a drinking fest. And I was like, I don't know, this is a good thing, you
But I
know.
think that's the thing that like I think that means so much to us. And one of the reasons, many reasons why we're here and having these discussions is because it's like we're not supposed to just learn how to cope, right? We want to be in the practice of taking these experiences and learning to fully live, like full on in the face of like the many, many, many things that we will lose in our lifetime. And I think our society as a whole has like we've been conditioned and we've learned that one way to deal with it is by numbing, right? And by not feeling.
Yeah, I mean, we're not encouraged to like feel big emotions as a society. Yeah.
One of the experiences for me has been, in that period of shock was like I was extremely tired. Like my body wanted to rest. I did not want to move. I, which was complete opposite of anything that I had really ever experienced myself going through. Like it was always like, how can I move? How can I create? How can I? And it was like the first time my body was like, no, no.
Probably because your like adrenaline is already going so much that it's like, I don't know if I can even do anymore, you know? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it was, it's kind of really like sitting and thinking about it. It's sometimes a blur to really, and I'll have moments of like remembering. Um, yeah, and the shock, I think you mentioned it, um, how that shows up later on, right? And like how that, do you want to share anything about that?
Well, I was going to say physically, even for me early on, and this is probably TMI, but I remember having to go to the bathroom constantly. Like, it just like my body was like running, 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 and it was like nothing would stay in. um, so that I thought that was like weird. Like, I was like, what is happening? Like, that was strange. Um, I just think like the adrenaline is our bodies were just like like you said you're exhausted, but like because your body's just like running, running, running. Even if you're not actually moving, it's like the adrenaline is pumping. And then yeah, I mean like even later on, I mean my dad died now 6 years ago, but I think we are like to your point, let me make sure I'm saying this right, but like we're kind of taught as a society to not really like express these big emotions, feel, or, you know, people expect it in like the first week, few weeks, maybe even a few months. But even later down the road, if you're still, you know, sharing about your person or talking about their death, you start to get like weird looks. I think people expect you to sort of like be over it. And you're really not. You're really not. It's still really early, and you're really never over it. You're going to always carry your grief with you and carry this person with you, like your memory of the person. So for me, that I think I don't think I was like trying to numb my emotions, but I was getting like external signals to like, okay, time to be over it.
to let
And I think yes, like, okay, we're sick of hearing about this. And I think it was taking its physical toll. Like I was kind of like holding things in that really needed to come out. And like that's why I'm so passionate about things like this and just sharing, because I think it helps people to process and heal, because otherwise things funky happen. Like, you know, your grief will show up somewhere somehow, whether it's physically, mentally, whatever. I don't know if that's answering your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And even I don't know, I experienced even this year, my mom passed away a little over 3 years ago. And like in the last probably 2 months, I've had a wave of insane. It's not insane. I mean, it's just feeling what's happening, right? Like, and actually, it started in October when my oldest niece turned 13. And my sister had this beautiful birthday party, rented a lake house. All of her friends were there. We were there. And well, yeah. And it was just like, and that's like kind of triggered this new wave of like in and out of grief, like extreme sadness, but also shock of like, I can't believe I'm still doing life without mom, like, and now even in this moment, I'm sitting in my mom's sister's house, who we lost a year after my mom passed away, with all of my cousins. And here we are, enjoying a family dinner with all of my cousins and our children and our dads. And there's two very distinct bodies that are missing.
Like there's a huge void. Yeah.
I know they're here with us. We all know that. And we talk about it. And like we can hear their voices in our heads when it comes to how our children respond to us or react to us in a moment. And it's like, oh, mom's laughing at me, or mom's being like, I told you so.
I love that. No, that's actually good because that reminds me of, yeah, like milestones like that. I thought one of the biggest things I think for me in that first year that was like a shock was any milestone, like my birthday. And I know you had a birthday right away too. My birthday was 6 weeks after my dad passed, and I was like, okay, like I was like, I'm fine. I think I'm, fine, like celebrating. I mean, I was around friends and very close friends who were amazing, and I had a great time. I just the actual day I remember being like, whoa, like I was a mess. Like not getting that phone call from my dad, it was rough. And then like, just subsequent holidays and things from there, just like to your point, like it is so glaringly obvious that someone is missing from those days.
Yeah. So it's yeah. And I think that too, even after, we all were offered through the hospital, grief counseling for up to a year, which we all took advantage of. And, but it's like at that year mark, it's over. How are you? It was like, right. It was like, you got like like a healed certificate. And I was like, what? Really? Okay. And I mean, I personally, I stuck with it because like just because of like my own internal knowing, I was like, I need to be in this conversation. I never really connected with the therapist. Whereas like on the other hand, like my dad did it with someone, and by the end of his therapy session, the therapist was like, "You're really great at this. Have you ever considered becoming a grief therapist?" And I was like, so absurd. Like I don't know. And the way that my dad grieved is very different from the way that I grieved, and what I perceived and how I perceived him to do it was like, I don't know. It just, I was like, I didn't witness him feeling and like moving with it. And sometimes still don't and still question it. And so try to be in this conversation of like, when he jokingly says, when I'm like, "How are you, Dad?" And he jokingly says, "I'm just waiting to die." I'm like, well, that's unfortunate because you're living still and we're here and we love you. And like, that is also like, I know you think it's funny, but
It's like, it's not funny. We're still here and we don't want another loss to deal with. Like,
well, and I was telling my cousins about it yesterday, and my cousins were like, that's just kind of rude because here he is with his 96-year-old mother, still alive, still has that time. And here we are in our, late 30s. Okay, we're almost all in our 40s now.
30 still, it's fine.
And we've all lost our moms, and it's like, and the next time he says that, I'm going to bring that up because I think that's really important for him to recognize, like how short and how sweet life is, right? And those things are just not to be taken for granted.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is probably another topic for another day because I feel like we could talk about this for hours. But I think that was another thing that surprised me is how, I mean, it's again, it's like you logically know people are going to grieve differently. Like you know that, but then when you see it happening, because you're like, okay, well, I'm feeling whatever, I'm grieving this way. Why isn't this other person doing that or whatever? You know what I mean? And it's like so interesting, like your dad's response versus yours versus, probably everybody's different. Um, Sometimes you feel like alone on an island. Like I know there, because I'm like obviously your dad was sad. Like you know that.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, but you're like, well, I'm expressing this way, and so why aren't you? And it can be like isolating.
Yeah, and that's the thing to recognize too. I don't think anybody ever really talks about like these different ways of like how shock shows up or how extreme sadness shows up. And it's like made, like culturally made to be like, oh, it's like a step by step course, where it's like any practice, from yoga to dance to meditation, like it is so individual.
Yes, and up and down. Like it's not, there's not like a one way linear.
Right. We don't go from point A to point B. And like, I think the important, and one thing that like, I think what feels important that has brought us together is like being able to be in these conversations to share our own experiences, and at the same time offer that permission for other people to share those experiences, so that we can learn from each other and we can better understand what these individual processes look like in different moments.
Right. Because I think the more we share, just you and I, but even as other people, it gives permission for other people to also share so that someone will hear their own similarities or like a similar story in what we're sharing so they don't feel so isolated. Which is, yeah, that's why I'm passionate about talking about it because I'm like, even if someone else's experience isn't like mine, I mean, someone might be like, oh, that resonates with me. This part does, but this part doesn't. But, so they can feel less alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there something that like maybe in the process of you looking back on a moment or a time or an experience that like shocked you how you were showing up? Like in that state of shock, were you able to like kind of zoom out and be like, I don't know, feel a moment of shock? Or maybe not, it's not, shock is not the right word, but like I feel like it took me a long time to be able to zoom out and like see how I was responding. Like I was very much like
You're
just
like in the weeds. Yes, I think I was so, because you're really in survival mode in those first weeks, even months. So yeah, you're just like in it and you're kind of like drowning in the weeds. So it's hard to look like go out, like you're saying. And I think once I was able to sort of like start to separate myself a little bit, I think what shocked me is like, I mean, I'm laughing because it won't shock people in my family and people know me really well because my default can be anger. You know, like I've been in therapy a long time for said reason. But I was surprised at how not really lashing out towards others necessarily, but like I was like pissed that I was like dad left us. Like I was mad at him. I was kind of like mad how things went down. Like I was like so mad that I was abroad and couldn't be there. Um and you know, like you've done work around your emotions too, like a lot of times pain, underneath pain and fear is like an anger, you know, sometimes underneath or vice versa. Some, you know, it's like that's kind of like a defense mechanism to like something hurting underneath. So I was obviously in deep pain, but I think I was surprised at how much it was like being not masked, but sort of like by my anger at I was like, my dad left us. Like, how could he do this? You know, like, um, so yeah. Anything that surprised you?
yeah, I was like I need to wake up. Not a need. I was like I think it was like being able to see myself in this in the muck and like finally get to a place to see myself and recognize myself in that place
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm. Like
then
not
make
lose yourself.
yeah and then make the choice that like I can move through this or I can move with this. Like even though I'm in it, it doesn't mean like I have to like get out. It doesn't have to be an instant like change and there's a choice in it.
Right. To not like get stuck in the
Yeah, and I
grief.
think I
Yeah.
said this previously, but like my teacher Suzanne Conrad, but it was because we went from losing my mom to um, my aunt was still battling pancreatic cancer, and so here we are, like, oh my god, we lost my mom in an instant. It felt like then we were like, we don't know how much time she has, and two of my cousins were pregnant with their one with their first, one with their third
And this is like during COVID
during COVID.
also. Yeah. I mean,
Yes, and so it's like, one of the many reasons I chose not to send Amelia back to school because when we wanted to, we came down to New Orleans to stay with them, um, and to spend that precious time with each other and with Aunt Sharon. And Aunt Sharon was like, I'm going to meet all my grandchildren. And she did. And she lived for another year and a half. And we knew how precious that time was.
so you didn't want to get like stuck in the grief so you couldn't appreciate the present moment, like left with her and like the new kids and all. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's like also, I think for me, a driving force and piece of it all was like constantly being in this conversation with Amelia, right? Because she was going through it too, and supporting her simultaneously was like, I definitely had my moments where I couldn't show up for her and making sure she knew that like that was just a moment that wasn't permanent, like that too is temporary, right? Like, and when mommy needs a moment to like disappear in the closet for a minute, like it's okay. Like that's okay. Um, but really, like I think the biggest shock was when I was able to kind of zoom out. I think maybe I dreamt about it, or maybe it was one of the moments where I was like curled up in a ball in my closet. Um, where it's like I kind of like had this out of body experience, and I like, just saw myself, like I saw my physical body and was like, I see you there. I honor you there. And now there's a choice to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and it was like, and that did, and that those breakdown moments didn't just show up in the closet. They showed up when I was driving down the road and a Barbara Streisand song would come on the radio. It's like
It's like you never know what's going to tip you off. It's like something
nothing. Yeah,
random. I know.
yeah,
Yeah, I think similarly for me, because I was the same. I'm like, I don't want to get stuck in this anger that I feel because, like, who's that helping? I'm like angry at someone that's not here anymore. Can't do anything about it. And I mean, I was in therapy, obviously, but I think for me, I started to, I mean, as a survival tactic, because we both of you and I were like relatively young when this. I mean, not young, young, but like I hadn't really had any close friends lose a parent. But I did have a few people I knew, like not acquaintances, but close enough to be like, hey, can I like talk to you about? And of course, all of their experiences were like very different. Um, but just being able to like talk about what I was feeling helped me to process that so I wouldn't get like stuck in the anger. What do you think were your best practices to help you, like when you saw yourself on the floor, you're like, okay, like what helped you do so?
I think like understand, like giving myself grace, right? Like that practice of forgiveness, like the practice of compassion, right? And it really started with just being there for me, and giving myself the space. Like I didn't want to go to my yoga practice for a really long time after I like it just well, I think I was afraid of it.
What you would like uncover held in your body. Yeah. No, I know. Yeah.
And so I think I walked like what we got a puppy.
Hey, puppies cure
You
everything, so that's
know?
fine.
I mean that like yeah, it was call them what you will. I think one word that's coming up for me is distractions. And I really want to kind of refile that. Like it wasn't a distraction, it was a modality of like coming back to myself, like of like it was the deconstruction to like then rebuild. And what I've like yeah, I had like visions. I started painting. I started watercoloring, I'm using watercolors, and I just had like all of these and gold leaf, like these visions of like my heart bursting open and like pieces, and it was a visceral sensation that I felt
hmm
in
Like
that
you
moment.
had to do it.
Yeah, like well, it was a visceral sensation that I had when I lost my mom of like my heart breaking and then and being caught, but it was like a continuous like visual that I kept having in my dreams. And I was like, how do I was like, dancing's not gonna make this. I was like, I wanted to see it. And so I started using watercolor um and piecing these things back together. And one day I came home and an old picture that I had of my mom and dad, my puppy got a hold of it and ripped it to pieces. And
Oh
I
no.
was
Devastated.
absolutely. And then what I wound up doing is piecing it back together with gold leaf in one of my paintings. And it's still, I mean, I love it. It's hanging in my home still. And so like the practice became like dropping into the feel and then like listening for what I needed. Like what kind of expression, like what channel could I like move with this? And it really was like that practice of like zooming out of like of like yeah, and that comes with just the practice um like recognizing where I am, it's in light year, it's called the line of choice, right? So you have the line, and above the line is, love, forgiveness, choice, grace, freedom. Below the line, you live, fear, unforgiveness, judgment. Um, so like redefining like what these like call it a distraction, but a distraction is not necessarily a distraction, like can spark so much more inspiration.
Well, and it's just a way, like I love the word modality. It's like a way of processing. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, unless it's just really like destructive, like, the drinking or like, somebody becomes addicted, which, I mean, people process pain. And sometimes, like, actually, Glennon Doyle says this. I mean, she's like, addictions, I mean, not that it's a good thing, but she's like, that's their way. It was like somebody's way of processing a trauma, like, and once, if people get clean, it's, you have to forgive yourself and say, I was doing the best I could to process whatever trauma. You know what I mean? So,
Well, it's like the only tool that we too, like just in society, it's like you know it's become the standard tool to like, or like the gateway to fun, to acceptance, to belonging, where it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, 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 no. We don't,
right. Well, that's why yours is like watercolor. I mean, that's very healthy, actually, think, like expression. I started to write a lot. I was like, it was processing emotions, and I was almost like getting like downloads. Like, I was just like, I had to like write. Like, it was like, I couldn't not. And like, yeah, maybe that was a way of distracting myself, but for me, it was a way of processing. I just was like, I had all these feelings inside that I was like, I have to write and get them out, because it's just like, I can sleep without doing so.
I think it was Glennon Doyle too. We're talking about that because I'm currently reading Untamed. Just a little backstory, um, and it's like boredom, or maybe that's from the Act of Creativity. It's another book that I've been listening to, but like boredom is like that is the cusp of like using your imagination, right? Like of really dropping into like you have to like clear it all out and trust, and I think too that goes to what we'll be talking about next is like these different modalities, the different movements of like how we process. Um, and that comes by trusting the body, right? And I know deep down, like that is the one thing that I do trust. To be able to listen and be like, okay, just give yourself grace, listen in, stay in the closet as long as you need to, pull over while you're ugly crying so you don't get into an accident. Like, um, or like, reach my hand into the back seat, hold Amelia's hand, and just be like, I just need a minute. Like, and it's okay to be like this, and it's okay to be a mess, and it's okay to, feel all the feels.
And it's good to show her that. I think that's what people in our society are afraid of, is if I go there, like if I feel the thing, if I feel the deep emotion that takes me to my knees in the closet or makes me almost wreck because I'm crying so hard, like I think people are afraid they'll get stuck in it. And some people do, but not always. It's like, one thing I think I really learned is like our bodies physically, when you're like sobbing, crying so hard, like it kind of your body like knows when to stop, because it's like such a heavy emotion that it eventually is like, okay, I can't take anymore, and it stops. Um, so our bodies kind of know like let's go, and then it's like, okay, back to, I gotta like make breakfast or whatever, do the thing. And I think we as a society are so afraid of getting in that dark place and never coming out that we don't experience the emotions at all. But what I think is healthy is like, like showing Amelia or showing anybody that you can go there, have your cry, have your whatever, and then like you're gonna be okay afterwards, and you're gonna go back to like regular day.
Yeah, it's trusting the internal light as opposed to the external light, right? It's like we're constantly, I think, to this, it goes deep into like possibly a whole nother episode. And it is, we're constantly, I think that we're trained as a society, whether consciously or unconsciously. And I think a lot of it is unconscious training and learning to trust everything outside of our bodies, right? To trust the validation from the outside, to trust the process given to us from the outside, instead of trusting what's in us, like in that light that as long as our heart is beating and we're breathing breath after breath, like we have that inside of us. We have that capability. We have, so it's trusting that as a human, individually, we can go to those dark places and trust that our light will still shine.
Yes, totally. That's so good. Trust is, that reminds me, and this is probably also leaning into our next topic, but I started my meditation practice during all of this because I just needed to go within. Like, I was like, okay, I just felt an urge to, like, it was, whether it was God, source, whatever you believe, like telling me to, I pray also, but it was like, I just needed to like be by myself and like listen so I could trust myself to like get through the pain, Um, and there's a lot of well-intentioned dogmas and people out there that are like, do this. This is, the 5 stages of grief. Like, this is what you should experience. And it just, nothing was resonating with me. So I was like, I need to go internally. To your point, like, it was also part of like a self-care. Like, I was like, I just need to be gentle with myself, have this time to myself, and be still and be quiet and listen to that internal light. And it really helped me.
Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.